Today, our invited guest is Leong Kowk Peng. He has been actively involved in Singapore's nature conservation advocacy. Thanks to their relentless efforts, we are able to conserve and achieve biodiversity within our small little island. Partnerships among public, private, and government are crucial in building a green, clean, and blue Singapore suitable for living, working, playing, and learning. However, their effort in bringing about the consciousness of nature conservation in Singapore took a long time to bear fruit. We are curious to know how you got started in this long journey.
Okay, maybe what I can do is start off with a little history with my association with the Nature Society Singapore. I joined as a member way back in the 1980s, essentially to participate in activities the society provides. It was called the Malayan Nature Society then. The reason I wanted to join was they were doing a lot of scientific, expedition to this place called Endau Romping. It was not a national park then. I joined because essentially I want to gain access into the area because I love jungle trekking. I love to wander into all these wild areas. That's why I joined as a member. But since then, I've been a member with the society. And in the 1990s, the society actually started this marine conservation group. And since then, I have already started scuba diving. So I've been diving and taking underwater photography. And I start to offer my services as an underwater photographer, to the society. And in the mid-90s, they embarked on this coral reef relocation, where they actually moved the corals from Pulau Air Cawan to Sentosa. That was because Jurong Island was being reclaimed. Before Jurong Island, there were a cluster of 5 or 6 islands there. And we actually collected the corals from the reef of Pulau Air Cawan and moved them to Sentosa. So I actually volunteer and I actually get myself to be the coordinator of this particular project. So every weekend, we have 2 boats out there with divers and we actually move them all the way to corals, the reef of Sentosa. It was self-sucked into the activities of the Nature Society. And it's only in the late 90s or early 2000s I becoming more aware that there's a lot of these wild green and blue spaces in Singapore are under development pressure, which means that a lot of these green areas and blue areas is going to be gone. So I actually started to volunteer with the Conservation Committee. Then he was hated by Dr. Ho Hua Chiu. So he actually wrote me in to help him to, embark on some of this campaign. So, which I did. That's how I get myself involved in conservation issue in Singapore.
We understand that your patience and each small step through the years have made changes in the Singapore nature landscape. How do you see the present situation of nature conservation in Singapore?
Okay, I would say if I compare the 90s to today, in terms of the government engagement, I think there's a sea change in terms of how the government respond or treat you as a volunteer or as from a nature group. Way back in the 90s when we sent a proposal to government, you can see that the government actually, the government agency, treat you at arm's length. You give them a proposal, you will not hear from them, and all you get is probably a thank you note for, suggesting, and then you don't hear from them very much. But today, when we engage the government, it seems that you are invited. There's no need for you to actually send a proposal. I think partly because of the minister that's right now that is looking after, the national development and, sustainability and so on and so forth. The government are more willing to listen to feedback and they are more willing to consult. And right now, as far as I know, all development work in and around green areas or in and around blue areas like coral reef requires what we call an environmental impact study, which means that once they have finished the study, they would have to consult the public. So, as chair of the Conservation Committee of the Nature Society, I represent one of the phases which they would call upon to have a look at the EIA and give our feedback and comment, which means that, I would say almost every other week now, I would have something like this, a government engagement session. But you probably have to spend quite a bit of time looking at the EIA and, what they call proposing a feedback or give our comments, whether we like it or not, whether there should be other alternatives and, and ask questions. So, for the last decade, I've been spending quite a bit of time with some of my colleagues from the Nature Society, going to government meetings, whenever there's some development work, they will call upon you to meet them and give our suggestions and give our comments and all these are all pro bono.
As with volunteer work, since it is pro bono, how can the volunteers sustain their livelihood? This question has always been in my mind.
I have no answer to that. I think what me and some of my colleagues are doing is out of passion and out of wanting to improve the living environment in Singapore. Whether we are paid or not, we will still be out there, looking at the wild areas in Singapore, if not for anything, to enjoy ourselves. And maybe that's one way to leave a legacy for Singapore, to give our inputs, whether it's through our feedback to the government agency. We also have things like publication where we actually document what we see and the places that we think it should be conserved, and hopefully, the younger generation could pick it up from where we left.
The Nature Society has been doing a great job. How does it support all these activities and get its funding?
The society essentially is a voluntary run society, but having said that, we do have some full-time staff who look after the outreach, membership, and some of the project-based what they call initiative. Members, we have membership fees. We sell publication. We have quite a lot of publication in Nature Society, nature related. We also have sponsorship from corporation and sometimes individual as well. And we do have our what you call, we actually own an office in our office in Geylang as well. So essentially it's from the kind donation of either individual or companies, Maybe I'll just show a few publications. Yes. This is one of the books we published in 2003. Okay, I think this is the first coffee table book that documents the marine biodiversity in Singapore. I think during that period, because there's so much reclamation on our southern islands, those were the time right after Chek Jawa and all. we find that, we have to highlight the marine biodiversity in Singapore. So we actually have a sponsor who sponsored the book, and a few of us, we actually get together, and I'm sort of the lead person in this project to come up with this particular publication called Singapore Waters of the Leong Kowk Peng. Mainly to showcase that we do have a thriving marine biodiversity despite our water being, very turbid, and sometimes when you dive, you can't even see what's in front of your hand. So this is one of our initiatives, and we actually use this for advocacy as well. We give a copy to, the government agency, to the ministers and so on. Yeah. And then in recent time, I actually initiated a campaign for the former Malayan KTM railway line to be turned into a green corridor. That was about 2010. When I first heard that Malaysia will be giving the land back to Singapore, I wrote to the Straits Times saying that this piece of land should be a public space, and it will make, it's already a ready-made nature corridor. And because of that, the Nature Society Council actually asked me, why don't you just drive the campaign? So I did gather a few, like-minded people, architects especially. And the first person I consulted was Tay Keng Soon. I went to his office and tell him my ideas. He was very excited. He actually even seconded one of his architects to be part of my team. So a few of us, mostly architect. I'm not architect, I'm an engineer. And then some other people from the society, we actually came up with a proposal and sent it to the government way before the handover date in July 2011. We actually give them a proposal in October 2010. But nothing was heard from them until a few weeks before the handover period. And then I got a call from the Ministry of National Development. The minister wanted to talk to you. And right after that, they form a focus group, and the rest is history. And never in my wildest dream, when we sent in the proposal that they will embrace the entire the railway line from Tanjong Pagar to Woodland. I'll be very happy if they just include half of it. But to my surprise, even Lee Hsien Loong in his National Day rally speech says, the entire rail corridor will be kept. So that was one of the best success stories in all my campaigning, with the Nature Society. And arising from that, we thought, it's not good enough. Because for us, the main thrust of what they call the rail corridor is not just a strip of land where the railway runs through, but it's also the green areas alongside, which is important. Because we find that without this patch of forest or woodland or mangrove, the rail corridor will have no meaning as a nature corridor. You need all these green areas alongside the corridor to be intact, because that will be a stepping stone for wildlife to move up and down. And because of that, a couple of years back, we actually published this particular book called The Green Rail Corridor, which some of us initiated, to highlight all the green areas and documents them, and to say why we think these are important to be kept as long as possible. We know some areas will be under development pressure, but that's quite okay. But when you develop the rail corridor, which is now under the purview of MPark, they should take all these green areas into account. And following this book, just last year, we focused on one particular area called Pangsua Woodland, which HDB has, choke for HDB development. But I think it's still a worthwhile documentation to tell HDB that, despite that it may be a small woodland, but it's worth keeping as much as possible. So these are some of the our advocacy work that we've been doing. In fact, we are coming out with a third book. Probably is somewhere around Alexandra. We call it Alexandra Woodland, but I think we would publish this book by this month, October.